We already discussed about user details, user details service, user details manager. Now we have a clear understanding what is the relationship between all of them and what kind of methods that these interfaces supports and how we have to leverage them in the scenarios of customizing these interfaces after implementing them. But to reduce our work, Spring Security Framework itself provides three implementation of user details manager. One is in-memory user details manager. If you have a requirement of doing some proof of concept or building some sample application to demo someone, you can always leverage in-memory user details manager. That means you can maintain the users, you can load the user details, authentication details, authorities, everything from the memory itself, which will store inside the Spring container. So in that scenarios, we will use in-memory user details manager. Suppose that we also have JDBC user details manager, which is the most famous implementation provided by Spring Security, and this is a production grade ready implementation. That means if you provide data source details of MySQL or Oracle or any database, this JDBC user details manager have all the code related to loading the user details, maintaining them, creating them, deleting them, changing password, whatnot. It has all the implementations provided inside it. And we also have LDAP user details manager. If your project leverages LDAP server for authentication and authorization purpose, we are free to use LDAP user details manager. In most of the scenarios, we should be good with this user details manager. But if you have a very specific requirement for your own project where you want to do it in something different, then you're always free to implement your own user details manager by implementing this user details manager interface. We will go and see what is a sample representation of all these user details manager implementation one by one so that we can get some better understanding from them. Let's go first to in-memory user details manager. So this is the in-memory user details manager present inside the Spring Security Framework with this package name. If you see here, it is implementing user details manager and also it is implementing some other interface which we will discuss in some time. But if you see, the main thing here is that it is implementing user details manager, and it also provides a constructor like you can pass the list of users, which all these users will be stored inside the memory of your application. Like one by one, it will loop them and call create user. Create user will put all the user details inside a map which stored inside the memory location. So we have these constructors followed by, if you remember, we have to take care of implementing how to create an user, how to delete an user, how to update an user, all such methods present inside our user details manager by providing a logic inside them. We see the very first method is create user. So it will accept an user and it will store that user details inside a hash map, and delete user will call remove the user details from the hash map. Update user will update the user details that we provided into hash map. Like the username is the key here and the value will be the whatever user that we store. User exist also will check whether the user is present with the given username, and change password implementation also provided, followed by update password details. And this update password details is coming from the other interface that we have seen, like user details password service. So this interface has one method. This is useful in the scenarios where your user don't know what's his old password, but he still want to update his new password or want to create a new password. So in such scenarios, if you remember, in most of the websites, whenever we say forget password, they will provide you a link where you can reset your own password. In such scenarios, we can leverage this update password where user don't have to pass his old password, but he will always pass his new password. Suppose that we also have our famous method which is load user by username, which is coming from the user detail service. Here it's very easy. If someone passing username, it will go and check the map present inside our memory location and try to get that. If that user is present, it will return a user details return type by creating a user level using its constructor where we can pass all the values present inside user that we are getting from the memory location. This is the way how our in-memory user details manager has been implemented, and now I will show you the sample code that we have written previously. If you can see it now line by line, this will make more sense to you now because we know what is the relationship between all of them. First, we are creating a new instance of user details manager. This in-memory user details manager in turn extends user details manager, which also extend user detail service. So that's why I named it as user detail service with the help of user. So if you can recall from our previous videos, user is a default implementation provided by the Spring Security that adheres to the user details interface schema. So by leveraging that, and we also have builder inside that, using them, we are creating a username by passing user details along with passwords authorities. So once we have that user, we are calling create user inside this in-memory user details manager, which will store these details inside a memory location. Suppose that for my authentication manager builder, I am indicating, so this is my user detail service. So when I say user detail service, whenever you try to validate a user details in terms of credentials and authentication, go ahead and leverage this implementation that I am providing to you. Otherwise, Spring Boot always go and follow the default way of handling the authentication. Now I can show you quickly. If I start my server with this code, framework will call my load user by username. I am keeping a breakpoint here. I'll go to a browser and call the service my account. Here I am entering the credentials admin 12345. If you see here, the breakpoint stopped here, which means the framework, there is a provider which by default follows, which we call DAO authentication provider. From there, it will call the in-memory details manager dot load by username, because here the framework inside provider class, it will check what is the current user detail service implementation. The current user detail service implementation is this in-memory user details manager. So that's why we set that user detail service, which will be set to the current one, and framework know now, okay, this is the current implementation and I have to call this method where it will come and try to load the user details from the memory location, and if the user is present, it will create a new user and send back the response which is of type user details. Similarly, we have JDBC user details manager. I would say compared to in-memory user details manager, JDBC user details manager have more advanced and it has most of the production ready features. That's where it implements user details manager. Along with that, it also extend other classes and interfaces, and you can see it has many methods. One is primary one, which is load user by username. So whenever we say load user by username, it will go and look into the database that we configured with the table name users, because by default in the framework they expect you to have a users table with these column names. Otherwise this will not work. You have to customize it as per your requirements. Similarly, we have create user, where it will leverage create user SQL, which is this one for creating a new user in the database. Similarly, for delete, update everything we have a SQL statement and associated method. Along with that, we also have groups concept here. If you want to maintain authorities, it's always good to have a roles associated for a group and assign all the users to a group. Suppose I want to have some admin group. I can have some 500 users mapped to admin group. Similarly, I can create many number of groups. All such configurations can be managed using Group Manager, where you have all the methods which are related to groups, like find all groups, find users in group, create group, delete group. So all these methods also implemented inside this User Details Manager. So if you have a requirement of storing the user details and retrieving the user details from database, then always leverage this JDBC User Details Manager. And if you want to customize it as per your requirements, like I want to have a different table name, different columns, then always take this as a reference and create your own User Details Manager and specify that to Spring Framework so that it is aware, okay, this is the details manager that I have to use while doing authentication. And for the scenarios where we have LDAP server, very similar to JDBC User Details Manager, we also have LDAP User Details Manager that implements User Details Manager, and it also supports create user, update user, and our famous method which is load user by username. So based upon your requirement, always free to use any of these default details manager provided by Spring Security. On top of that, if you have any specific requirement, take them as a reference and implement in a similar way as per your application requirements. With this, we have enough of information about Details Manager and what are default implementations provided by Spring Security. In next few videos, let's try to create a database, maintain users inside database, connect to that, and try to do authentication using JDBC User Details Manager. Thank you. Bye.